There is no doubt that there is a need for diversity of content. And so in most international markets, what diversity means is local contents and US contents. And I think what is interesting is also to think the other way around. For the domestic market, what does diversity mean? Well, maybe a broader type of content from the large blockbuster that we all rely on, but also the comedies, the diversity of movies that historically were more present on the US market and that are needed. And that I think we have every sign.
This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. Here this week for the final segment of our CineEurope podcast series, brought to you by our friends over at TAPOS by Jack Rowe and Cinity by Christie. In this week's edition, I am joined by Romeo Duchesne from the Box Office Company. Together, we will be going over what we can look at the box office this coming weekend. And later on, you'll hear from Julien Marcel, our CEO here at the Box Office Company, as we go over highlights from CineEurope 2024. And in our sponsored segment, you'll hear from Jack Klein, a veteran in the digital space here in the exhibition business, one of the pioneers in digital projection. He is now bringing forward a new PLF concept, Cinity, in collaboration with Christie. They were over at CineEurope. We got the catch up, and we will bring you that conversation in the sponsored segment of this week's episode. But let's get started. Romeo, it was another great, solid weekend at the global box office. And we have to bring up just the runaway success of Inside Out 2. Now, 2 weeks into the market, doing fantastic business. And it's going to be a photo finish here for the first spot domestically, because we've got another big opening weekend coming up from our friends at Paramount. A Quiet Place Day 1, challenging Inside Out 2 for the top spot in the market. I'm not sure how this is going to shake out. It can be either or, but let's start with A Quiet Place Day 1. We've got a $50 to $60 million opening weekend range coming into this week for A Quiet Place Day 1. And as always, our final forecasts can be found on an updated basis over at boxofficepro.com. But Romeo, what is your forecasting telling you about this title? Are you aligned with our range? Does 50 to 60 make sense to you, or are you a little bit lower?
Let's remind us some comparable title for our audience. Like A Quiet Place 2 did $48 million opening. The first one did 50. We can also quote like Smile, who did 23, Scream 6, who did 44, and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, who did 58. I can clearly see that it's totally in line with what you just said, Daniel, which is being an opening being between 50 million and 60 million. Definitely a little bit lower than Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, but honestly, it's in the same area compared to the previous one, A Quiet Place 2. It's clear that now all the demographics are quite aware of the release of the next one, and they are interested in it, which is a great sign for upcoming box office, and also a lot of awareness in smaller cities, which is also a great sign for box office. And I think it resonates also with what Bob Iger said 2 CinemaCons ago. I'm doing a little bridge with Disney and Inside Out, that they need to create the sentiment of emergency because of the abundance of all the content that we have on every different platform. They need to create the sentiment of emergency to bring people to the movie theater. And I think that's exactly what we did. And I think Paramount can do the exact same thing with A Quiet Place Day 1.
That's a really good point. And what you bring up in terms of the tracking and awareness of this title in different spots across the country, that's what makes us think this could hit something closer to 60 million, which, let's say, it's higher than the pre-sales are telling us that this movie's going. But there's a lot of awareness on this title. And as you mentioned, Paramount has done a great job in making the Quiet Place movies something that you enjoy primarily at the movie theaters. Not only with that great opening weekend success of A Quiet Place in 2018, you mentioned that $50 million opening, went on to do $188 million domestically. But for the sequel, A Quiet Place Part 2, if you remember in 2021, Romeo, this is a movie that Paramount worked to get closer into the release schedule. So this was scheduled later on into the year, but the pandemic recovery was quicker than expected. Cinemas were open. Paramount saw some positive numbers there and the sort of traction brought it back to theaters earlier than expected, and they were rewarded with a $47.5 million opening weekend. We have to say that $47.5 million was probably earlier than some folks. Part of the audience was comfortable going to the theaters. Since then, we've got great like cultural zeitgeist moments like Spider-Man No Way Home, Barbie, Top Gun Maverick, Avatar The Way of Water, to get those audiences back and comfortable and ready. And that's why we think A Quiet Place Day One has that $50 million opening weekend benchmark as a realistic starting point where this movie can take off to really perform along expectations. And as we said, that ceiling of 60 million, maybe the data isn't pointing us there, but the awareness for this title to be something that you see in theaters is really off the charts in terms of the national conversation. So that could very well unseat Inside Out 2 for the number one spot. In weekend two, Romeo, we have to say this. If A Quiet Place Day One does decently well and matches that opening weekend from 2018, ends up at the $50 million range, there's a chance that Inside Out 2 can keep the number one spot at the box office domestically. This movie is just a runaway hit. We are currently predicting a $45 to $55 million third frame for Inside Out 2 this weekend. And we have to say it, Romeo, these numbers are so robust because after just 2 weekends in the global market, Inside Out 2 is the highest grossing movie of 2024 to date, domestically and globally. It's already earned $355 million in North America and a total of $724 million worldwide. The film already exceeded the run of the original Inside Out in theaters, the cumulative domestic run of the original Inside Out in theaters earlier this week. So I think we're in line for something as big as $1.5 billion worldwide for Inside Out 2. This is massive. Why don't we look over the numbers here? Because we had a $100 million sophomore frame for Inside Out 2 last weekend. It's only one of 7 titles to cross $100 million over its second weekend. Disney releasing a great performance for this title. And like we said, it's going to be close to see who turns out in first place here. There's a really good chance if Inside Out 2 continues its great pace in the market. But now this is the exciting part. In third place, our forecast for this weekend comes with one of the biggest risks coming to theaters this year. The first part of Horizon, an American saga from writer, director, and star Kevin Costner, coming out from Warner Brothers. I don't know how to make sense of this because this was always going to be a big risk, Romeo. And then we had the Cannes Film Festival where this movie had a screening to okay notices, but the tracking was impacted after that early screening.
Yeah, the tracking was clearly impacted. I mean, the tracking was high before this premiere in Cannes. I think like everyone were ranging around like 60, $80 million domestic in the US. But since
For
then,
the total run, right? Not
for
for
the
an opening
total run,
weekend,
yeah,
obviously. So we were thinking 60 to 80
yeah,
domestic run.
yeah. And those tracking kept going down and down and down.
Well, I think it's concentrated, maybe not on a national level, but on a regional level. And I think that's why it's so tricky to forecast a title like this. Our range right now is all over the place. We'll have to wait for some of those show times to fill in, some of that demand to show up. But this can go one of two ways, closer to the low teens or 20 and above.
Yeah, and like I said earlier about the demographics of A Quiet Place Day One that were pretty broad. I think A Quiet Place will hurt definitely Horizon. So
Yeah.
that's why, yeah, my personal feeling will go down.
Yeah, it's I think realistic when you have the top 2 movies in the market probably combined to $100 million for the third one to be a little bit left out. It's also a different film altogether. It's not a cross quadrant title. Horizon isn't the sort of movie that will bring in general audiences. It's going to be a Western drama, slower paced. It sets up a larger storyline. We do expect Costner to bring in, but I don't think it's crazy to think that this movie can make around $20 million on the opening weekend just based out of the areas in the country where it's over indexing. Maybe the high teens, right? I think that's a realistic way of looking at things. The ceiling for this title, I think, on a theatrical run level domestically might be 100 million. I think, if it hits the heights it's supposed to be, this is going to turn out being $100 million movie. I'm not sure that's fair because it's probably not going to be too easy to get to that $100 million benchmark. But I think 60 to 80, those numbers sort of make sense when we look at other similar titles released this year, especially when you look at it as a sort of adult skewing, slower film with some action elements. Again, very different sort of movie, but maybe a similar demographic. You had Civil War from A24 open in April to 25 million, but it didn't have those legs to even get it to 75 million. I think it's going to finish its run right around the $70 million mark here in North America. Might be something similar for this first part of Kevin Costner's. Coming up next, we've got our sponsored segment of this episode. I speak with Cinity's Jack Klein on the latest PLF innovations coming to theaters near you. That interview is coming up after the break.
We are witnessing a growing trend of audiences seeking premium large format auditoriums. As directors experiment with new visual storytelling techniques, moviegoers want to experience what's next. 3D, 4K, 120 FPS high frame rate is just the beginning. Cinity, the newest PLF system, delivers a wide color gamut, ultra-high brightness, and high dynamic range combined with immersive audio that launches your audience into the story. With a steady stream of Cinity formatted content in the near future, be sure to find out more at cinity2infinity.com.
And we are back here on the Box Office Podcast for this special CineEurope conversation with Jack Klein, the executive consultant for Cinity and former CEO for Christie. Jack, welcome. It's been a number of years that we've been working together here in this industry, going to trade shows all over the world.
Thank you. I'm honored to be on the call here, and it's a very exciting time.
Now, we spoke a little bit about Cinity in last year's edition of this podcast when we were in Barcelona. And I think there's a lot of excitement when talking about this technology reaching more moviegoers around the world. So let's start in square one. To our listeners, how would you describe Cinity?
Yeah, Cinity is the newest format for premium projection cinema. It utilizes the latest in technology to provide this premier viewing experience. We're talking about 3 times the contrast ratio of normal cinema and 5 times the brightness on 3D and 3 times the brightness on 2D. So we've utilized the latest in laser technology and image processing to provide this incredible viewing experience to moviegoers.
And it's a great time for that to come through for exhibitors right now, because as we look at those PLF numbers, premium technology keeps on over-indexing in every single title that succeeds at the box office. It's a huge share of those ticket purchases are going to experiences like Cinity. And one of the things that I like about this PLF offering coming from your side here is that it's a PLF option coming to market that allows the exhibitors to advertise any way they want to advertise it. So I wanted to ask you what that means for audiences. HDR, HFR, these are terms that everybody in the industry is well aware of, right? You've been espousing new technology like digital for many years, but it's that last bridge. How do we clarify this for audiences? How do all these acronyms translate to a more engaging movie-going experience?
Right. Over the years, exhibitors have done an amazing job creating their own private branded PLFs. They've invested heavily in the latest audio capability, immersive sound. They've put in great seating, motion bases, design, and large screens in their cinema. But at the end of the day, the image on those screens is the same image that's on every other 150 screens around the world. So what Cinity's doing is saying, okay, now you've created this incredible audio and comfort environment. Let's put a layer of the latest technology on top of that, something that creates this just incredible viewing experience with a brighter picture and higher contrast. Because at the end of the day, when people look at an image, the number one recognition factor is contrast. Contrast is number one. colors number 2, resolution's number 3, and then brightness. And that contrast, moviegoers have gotten used to seeing incredible pictures on their homes because TVs have kept up with higher contrast ratios. So we need to keep this premier viewing experience in the cinemas. And I think the box office numbers, they show for themselves. If people are going out to the movie, they want to see it in the best possible auditorium. And that's going to be the PLF auditorium. And we want it to be the Cinity one.
Now, Cinity's been in the market for a number of years. We know there's a big prevalence of that technology in China. And I just have to look at films that have performed really well in markets that have the Cinity technology, that maybe there was something missing in that presentation elsewhere. I'm thinking of a title, let's say, like Paramount's Gemini Man from a couple of years ago, right? The sort of movie that is shot specifically for the best experience to be in what Cinity has to offer. And in those markets where Cinity is available for those audiences, you're seeing those results. So let's talk about that. What sort of movies can be seen in the Cinity format, and where can audiences see them worldwide today?
We've received tremendous support from the studios. They recognize not only the premier viewing experience, but they're willing to make special DCP versions for Cinity, just like they do for IMAX and Dolby, because it's just the best experience you can see in the theaters. We have 16 titles that have been released in Cinity from the major studios. And by the end of the year, we'll have about 26 movies will have been released in Cinity. And then, of course, the big one, Avatar 2 in 2025. And, if you don't see it on a Cinity screen, you're not going to see Avatar.
It's a really good point you raise. We have to start getting ready as an industry for that next big global benchmark. Avatar 3. I mentioned that because I remember when Avatar 2 was coming out, a lot of exhibitors were telling me in August, before that December release, oh, what do you know about PLF? I want to invest in PLF. Well, listen, August before a December release, you might be cutting it close to start thinking that way. Now is the time to start considering these options. And when you're considering PLF, it's important to know what's out there. So I do want to ask you, what sets Cinity apart from the other PLF applications that are on the market today?
Yeah, like IMAX and Dolby Vision, Cinity is a special master that the studios do to create this premier visual experience. IMAX focuses on extremely large screens, especially the height, the aspect ratio for IMAX is unique to IMAX. And they've been very, very successful with that, even utilizing just standard projection. I would say Dolby Vision is the closest to Cinity. The Dolby believes that high contrast and high brightness also are very important, and consequently, they've utilized that within the mastering process for the Dolby Vision. I think what makes Cinity different is high frame rate, because the fact that it's been over 100 years of 24 frames, it's time to change that. And filmmakers like Jim Cameron with Lightstorm and others are now recognizing that as the screens get bigger and brighter, motion artifacts become more and more annoying and difficult to view. So Cinity focused on high frame rate as well as all the other, and it kind of creates this future proofing of technology to, as Ang Lee says, the whole shebang. The contrast, brightness, resolution, frame rates, all put in together to create this incredible experience.
And I was there at that press conference you had with Ang Lee at CinemaCon a couple of years back to announce the launch of Cinity. Seeing top tier talent like that has succeeded at the blockbuster level, at the art house level, espouse this technology as a sort of, I remember his words being an additional palette to their filmmaking skills and artistry, I think is super important. You've made that point with the filmmakers. And now I think part of the conversation that we're getting to is having that conversation with exhibitors that are looking to differentiate their PLF arsenal, right? PLF, we haven't seen that be a one-size-fits-all solution. We see a lot of exhibitors, a lot of major chains come out with different PLF concepts, even sometimes within a single complex. So I wanted to ask, in terms of differentiating in terms of a business approach, what does Cinity offer exhibitors that other PLF formats might not communicate?
Well, as I said, they've done a great job with their branded PLFs, but we have to address the image on the screen. And we have to make use of the technology advancements that have made in laser projection over the last 6 to 8 years. And Cinity can offer it. And we partner with the exhibitor brand to put this layer of technology on that can be kind of unique to that exhibitor that's putting it in, and understanding that only Cinity can do 4K, 3D, high frame rates up to 120 hertz. It's the only one.
And that kind of sounds exactly what Avatar 3 is going to be primed to play in, right?
Along with all the technology that Cinity brings to the table, we really need to recognize this high frame rate because filmmakers are starting to see it. And I've had the privilege of being in the room when somebody saw a cinematic 4K 3D and at high frame rates. And it's pretty incredible. Filmmakers are really recognizing that. And Lightstorm, all their movies are going to be motion graded in 48 frames, and they're using Pixelworks TrueCut motion grading. And he is so convinced of this, they went back and did Titanic and Avatar 1 with TrueCut motion grading because it just enhanced the visual experience. And so the success of movies like Avatar and this year Godzilla Kong, I mean, I was there when the director saw the motion grading TrueCut version of Cinity, and it was like, wow, this is incredible. And it just made that viewing experience so much better because of the brightness and the elimination of motion artifacts.
And a reminder to our exhibitor listeners, Godzilla X Kong, the film you mentioned, Jack, opened to $80 million, a massive overperformance in March when we really needed a title. Over 40% of that opening weekend box office coming from premium large formats. We have data pointing that audiences are willing to pay a higher ticket price for a much better experience. And that's exactly the space that you're coming into with Cinity. And it's the space that you've been involved with in terms of cinema technology for a large part of your career. Jack, you were there for that digital transition. You were there moving the very heavy boulder up the hill, replacing 100-year-old technology with a technology that's now commonplace. This is the next evolution of that. So I do want to talk about that connection between Christie, a company you have very close ties to, and Cinity.
Christie is the major technology partner for Cinity, and they are responsible for developing this and selling it and promoting it outside of China to create as many outlets as possible and allow as many moviegoers as we can to see this really exciting visual experience.
Now, of course, any investment, any CapEx investment right now in exhibition has to be looked at very carefully, not just in solving a problem of where we are now, but making sure that you're going to be prepared for the next 5, 10 years. And Cinity is a sort of technology that has a game plan for that span of time. Can I ask you, what does the future bring for technology like Cinity? What can exhibitors expect once they sign on to that Cinity train?
Well, I think that, as I said, future proofing, because we've gone through some difficult times in cinema, and their exhibitors are cash challenged. The Cinity business model is not a revenue share. We think that the exhibitors need to have all the revenue that they can get from the box office during these challenging times. It's a purchase, and it's half the price of any of the other premium large formats. So it's cost friendly. It's a future-proof solution because we've put in laser and high frame rate, any capability, anything that can be thrown at Cinity, they can put it up on the screen in an amazing manner. So I think that's all really important. I think the real key here is that as we move into cinematic high frame rate, you're going to want to make sure that you're capable of showing this premium format at high frame rates, because I believe that that's the future. And just like converting from film to digital was a long haul, it was a lot of work. You have to convince a lot of filmmakers, studios, post-production people just a lot of people in there that they're not resistant to it, but it is a major change. And the TrueCut high frame rate is a real great complement to Cinity and just enhancing that experience. So I think that, continued technology advancements will probably most likely come from frame rates.
Now, how can people find out more about Cinity? Of course, we've got the events like CinemaCon, CineEurope. For those exhibitors that might not be able to make it, how can they get in touch to see if this is the right solution for them?
Website Cinity to Infinity has all the information on Cinity, and it is kept updated with the latest installation sites. So that's a good tool. Christie promotes Cinity and all their sales activities and trade shows and seminars in the point of contact for that. And of course, myself, I stay involved in step with Christie and Cinity and the studios in getting the movies formatted in Cinity. So there's a lot of opportunity to reach out to us, and we're happy to speak to anybody about this amazing technology.
Well, Jack, thank you very much for joining us here on the Box Office Podcast to talk everything about Cinity. To find out more, like my colleague Jack Klein here mentioned, go to cinitytoinfinity.com, where you'll be able to get all the details on this breakthrough new technology. Jack, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Daniel.
And that was Cinity's Jack Klein going over the PLF innovations that were on show at CineEurope 2024. After the following break, you'll hear a lot more about that event. I'm joined by our CEO, Julien Marcel, and we will go over the highlights of CineEurope 2024. That comes up after this break.
As a cinema, it's frustrating when your success is decided by things you can't control. Hollywood hits come and go. What stays the same are the amazing experiences you offer your customers, whether it's an engaging and successful membership program, seamless seat upgrades, next-level food and drink, or extras like arcade games and bowling. But to do this well, you need a POS system that can keep up. TAPOS has been developing cinema software for over 25 years. They know what it takes to run a successful movie theater, and they've created a solution that can match your boldest ambitions. Learn more at taposapp.com.
And we are back here on the Box Office Podcast, recording this segment from Barcelona, where Julien Marcel, the CEO of the Box Office Company, and myself are attending CineEurope 2024. Always good to be here in Barcelona, Julien. Good week so far?
Yeah, excellent week. Good to see you, Daniel.
Now, it was an exciting week, a lot of panels, a lot of studio presentations, a great feeling because the event started on the Monday after the opening weekend of Inside Out 2 made $295 million worldwide over its opening weekend. That isn't even including markets like France, like Spain, where it opened last weekend. You just came from hearing those insights in our news segment. But now listeners can hear about everything they missed at CineEurope because we were here for you. Let's start with your executive roundtable, Julien, that you moderated. We had executives from studios, from top exhibitor companies, from top vendors. We had on that panel Stephen Odell, the president of international distribution over at Sony Pictures Releasing, Giovanni Dolci, the global chief sales officer of IMAX, Kadri Kalma, the business development manager over at Apollo Cinema Baltics, Tim Richards, founder and CEO of View International, and Mark Vian, the president of international distribution over at Paramount. A lot to talk about, not only in terms of the success of Inside Out and the market being alive and kicking. We had also a major piece of news coming from Sony, not the one we expected or feared, I have to say, a different type of acquisition than the one people were talking about.
Yeah, actually, this roundtable, as you mentioned, arrived just on the heels of the announcements of the fantastic opening weekend for Inside Out 2, which, by the way, was the very first thing anyone had to say on this panel. And it was very nice and gracious of studios present there to congratulate their friends from Disney, because the good news for Disney is a good news for the industry as a whole these days. So that's definitely set a very nice tone for this discussion. And on the side of Sony, indeed, we had a very interesting piece of news since last week. Sony announced the acquisition of Alamo Drafthouse, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, the very first acquisition of a US circuit since Paramount decrees have been lifted, right?
Yes. Now, Sony wasn't part of a Paramount decree. Sony had ownership of theaters in the US since, obviously, the Paramount decrees were in place. But it's important to note, as you mentioned, I think the idea of studio ownership of movie theaters, of national chains, kind of got back into the attention of moviegoers, of analysts, after the formal repeal of those Paramount decrees. That first acquisition happening from the only major studio to not have a streaming service, the only major studio with the longest theatrical exclusivity window, it has to be a perfect fit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really, you're right, a very good signal sent to everybody out there that acquiring a circuit these days makes sense. So that's a very positive piece of news. And as Steve Odell highlighted it in this panel discussion, that's also a very clear message. And that's a sign of trust from distribution to exhibition. And for that, I think everybody is very excited.
Something that Stephen Odell said in that panel was that the Alamo acquisition was going to be instrumental for Sony to continue delivering cultural moments at the movies. And that's something that I think resonates very, very well. Now, it's a domestic play. It's not an international play. And we know studios have been on and off part of the exhibition family overseas in recent years. But domestically, I think it's unique. I'm not sure we can call it a trend quite yet, but what we can call a trend is actually the story happening on the other side of the table, not studios going into exhibition, but exhibitors going into distribution. You heard last week from Claire Binns from Picture House Cinemas, also Picture House Entertainment, which has its own distribution wing. View International, Tim Richards on your panel this week, if I'm not mistaken, also announcing that View is going to be distributing their own slate of films.
I think it was announced before, but there was a very solid piece of article in the Financial Times last weekend, so the day before the executive roundtable. And indeed, what was striking during this discussion is that frontiers are blurring between exhibition, distribution. We see distribution going into exhibition, exhibition going into distribution. IMAX was around the table as well, and they certainly have a foot on each side. And so that makes the thing really interesting. And most of the discussion revolved around the need for more diverse content. Mm-hmm. And I think the right way to look at these various initiatives from exhibitors moving into distribution is not so much that they want to do the job of the other party. It's just that now we all need to play a role in getting the diversity of content that is needed for all movie theaters to keep being successful.
And a great reflection of what you just mentioned, Julian, in IMAX having a foot in each part of the industry, IMAX distributing more and more their own films. We knew that IMAX was already a partner of Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis. Coppola was still looking for general distribution partner domestically. A lot of those rights were sold internationally already. The announcement last week of Megalopolis going to Lionsgate for a wide theatrical release, I believe later this year, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, those IMAX screens already locked up. It seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this is increasingly becoming a tale of two industries in exhibition. Those with a premium large format and those looking for a premium large format.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is no question that premium is part of the winning formula. We saw a lot of that this week with a lot of visibility for IMAX. We mentioned it, they were on the panel, but also with Dolby, with their new combination of Dolby Atmos plus Dolby Vision made available for independent. We also had our friends from ICE Theaters who were there presenting, so it was very visible. And part of the premiumization is also the increased quality of sound and image. And here again, the visibility on the trade floor, but also in all the presentation of Christie with their Cinity format, of Barco with their HDR new initiatives. So all of that points toward the same direction, which is there is no other option than outstanding quality. It's a prerequisite. It's not enough.
I think what you're saying here, Julian, really encapsulates a week there where we really heard a little bit of everything. A box office debut that got everyone excited, the need for more titles, something Tim Richards said on your panel, that the first 6 months of the year show us why we need more movies from everyone. And then finally, that new trend coming towards us, premiumization, cutting edge technology, and how it's just not enough to have a standard auditorium. That standard needs to be raised across the board.
Absolutely. And I think also if you look at the trend, there is a sense here, future will tell, that maybe this very week was a turning point in a sense that we all knew getting into 2024 that due to last year's strikes, the first 4 months or 5 months would be a challenge. There have been more than we expected. That has been the case more than we expected, maybe. But with the big success of Inside Out 2, there is a sense that the summer season is launched. And I think the other very interesting element that was brought when it comes to the diversity of content and the winning formula is there have been in the first part of the year very noticeable successes in local content. A huge comedy in France, Un Petit Truc en Plus, that has just reached 7 million admissions in France, which is outstanding. There has been a big success with an Italian movie.
It's really interesting what you bring up here because those domestic productions really help these individual European markets overperform on a basis where when you don't have Hollywood bringing those hits, you really have to look elsewhere. And Europe was able, on a country-by-country basis, rely on that, lean on that for better results. Italy, that not that long ago was in a bit of a crisis, now bounces back thanks to their domestic industry coming in and delivering a overperformance with a domestic comedy. And the title of that we just confirmed is There Is Still Tomorrow. Just great results that we saw there. There are other markets that are still lagging behind when those domestic titles aren't there. Turkey being an example that really relies on that domestic industry. Whenever they have a weak year and Hollywood has a weak year, that's when the situation gets a little bit difficult.
And there is no doubt that there is a need for diversity of content. And so in most international markets, what diversity means is local contents and US contents. And I think what is interesting is also to think the other way around. For the domestic market, what does diversity mean? Well, maybe a broader type of content from the large blockbuster that we all rely on, but also the comedies, the diversity of movies that historically were more present on the US market and that are needed. And that's, I think we have every sign that it's coming back, both from the domestic market, but also potentially from the US. And that's an element that I think we have to keep on the outlook.
And looking at the studio presentations, we can't get into too much detail on what we saw. There's NDAs that prevent us from doing that. But we'll give a macro overview of some of the trends that we saw, talking about that diversity of European titles. Studio Canal, as the only European distributor, in really good presence here, showcasing a number of their films this year.
Yeah, and very impressive lineup presentation. Also very impressive successes where with Studio Canal that has been able to cross the 1 million admissions bar in several markets in parallel with the same movies. We see the diversity of movies in different content. They were in different countries. They were also present in Cannes recently with movies that were really highlighted. So interesting to see that Studio Canal stands out there, is really the single representative of this pan-European studio strategy, and that's very exciting to see year after year.
And also, right outside of the majors, you had another company present, this time for the first time at CineEurope, reflecting their global ambitions. Angel Studios, which ended up last year as a top 10 distributor in the US, presenting at CineEurope, screening the film Bonhoeffer, which is set in Germany. It's a German story. Not that long ago, they released Cabrini, Italian story. You see this independent distributor in the US that you would associate with a faith-based middle America audience, very US-centric. Not the case at all. Angel Studios is making a statement by being here that they have global ambitions, and their presentation at CineEurope, I think, is a reflection of that.
And think about it this way. Last year, in the top 10 or 11 movies, there was a concert and there was a Sound of Freedom, two completely unexpected winners. And I think what we see this year is also the next stage after that. Okay, what do we do with this success? Was it just a one-off? Well, clearly Angel Studios do not intend to make it a one-off, and they come not only with multiple content coming from various geographies, but also with their pay-it-forward formula that they have experimented successfully with Sound of Freedom. So I think that's indeed interesting to see that those trends are not purely domestic.
And talking about trends, you also saw a good mix between established franchises and either new IPs or original films from a lot of the studios presenting. On the franchise side, Paramount going big on Gladiator 2. It makes sense if you're in Europe. When in Barcelona, tell people it's Rome. On the Disney side, we saw a lot in terms of their legacy IPs. On their 20th Century Studios presentation, I have to say, we saw more footage from Alien Romulus. I can't wait to see that. It looks so frightening. But on the original side, Warner Brothers, it's Formula One weekend here in Barcelona. They announced a release date in 2026 for that F1 movie they've been filming with Brad Pitt. A lot of excitement here in Europe for that title. Universal has the international rights for the Michael Jackson biopic. That's being handled domestically by Lionsgate. We actually saw some footage from it. Can't reveal too much, but it's safe to say that a lot of the exhibitors here were really impressed by the potential that this Michael biopic has.
Yeah, absolutely. And overall, I think there is a clear feeling that what would not be safe is to not come with the original content. And so we all see the franchise we love and that we know will work, but there is an overall sense that we know that since the Barbenheimer phenomenon, that there is a need to reinvent maybe veneered brands or characters like Michael Jackson. And so I think it's very interesting to see that this required diversity already shows in the lineup presentations. It's not just wishful thinking for the future. It's there. It's coming, and it's coming very, very soon.
And other great innovations happening in the industry. We saw from Sony. We know that they've been distributing movies from Apple, bringing movies that were originally destined to streaming, partnering with this service to bring them to theaters. We saw Napoleon last year. This year, we've got Fly Me to the Moon coming out later on in July. That was actually screened here at CineEurope. And then in the fall, I believe, we've got an action thriller type of thing with George Clooney titled Wolves. Those are two Apple titles hitting screens from Sony. When I look at the slate right now, and I know we've been saying this for a while, but it's really exciting to see now that the strike is behind us, now that finally we can talk about movies that are coming to theaters, the slate looks fantastic. And I think there's a lot of people excited, not only for 2025, but honestly, for Q3 and Q4 of this year.
Absolutely. And it's not, the enthusiasm is back there. I mean, just to get back for a second to the Disney situation, bear in mind that we are going beyond where Disney was in 2019 with Inside Out 2. After 6 months without any Disney brand content, well, that's a comeback. And so I think that's really sort of shows on all areas. There was a momentum. The momentum came back and was visible, and everybody was attending studio presentations with those positive expectations that they were going to see what will bring the audiences back in the auditorium. So I think the studios did a fantastic job at assembling diverse lineups. And so all of a sudden, you could see the audience saying, okay, we know what we need, and we start seeing it on screen.
Building on that Disney point is so important, Julian. I just have to remind our listeners that the number one studio from 2014 to 2019, the studio that released 8 of the 10 highest grossing titles, I believe in 2018, might have been in 19 as well, didn't release a single new movie under its brand for the first 6 months of this year. Now, that's because of the strikes. That's not a strategic pivot from Disney. And as soon as Disney came back, they came back swinging, not only with Inside Out 2, a great overperformance. We've got what might end up being the highest grossing movie of the year coming out in late July with Deadpool and Wolverine. Man, we really missed Disney these last 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. And we miss Disney, and we were very happy to have Universal. And now, what do we get? Both. We get the Minions coming, and so maybe my bet is that after Barbenheimer, we'll have the Inside Minions phenomenon.
Why not? Let's go for it.
That would be a good...
I was hoping that you would pair Alien Romulus with something. I'm not sure there's anything to pair that with. Maybe just whiskey. That's what I would recommend. Well, Julian, thank you so much for joining us here on the Box Office Podcast.
Thank you, Daniel.
And a huge thank you to our CEO, Julian Marcel, for joining us here on the Box Office Podcast. Earlier, you heard from Jack Klein over at Cinity and my colleague, Romeo Duchesne at the Box Office Company. The Box Office Podcast will return with a new episode next week. New episodes launch every Thursday, so don't forget to subscribe. That helps us do what we do each week. Thank you again for listening.